Hi, I'm Amber from Australia. Welcome to the Chocolate Lily Shawl tutorial. I have chapterized this video so you'll be able to find the segments quite easily, and they will include the introduction, I'll talk a bit more about this design, the how to work this looped edging step by step, blocking the shawl for the best shape, and then I will teach how I embroidered this simple chain stitch pattern. And you can skip the chain stitch pattern, or you can embroider it as I have done, or get creative and add your own touch to this. So you'll be able to skip ahead to any chapters as you're working on the shawl, or just watch the video through. And at the end, I'll share some of my styling tips. As you can see, I'm already wearing it in a particular way, which I think fits this design quite well. So introduction, the Chocolate Lily Shawl. These are based on Australian chocolate lily flowers, which are quite prolific and grow across Australia in most parts. They are a beautiful purple flower and are an important source of food or bush tucker for First Nations people. They were dug up mainly for their tubers. The chocolate lily name comes from the smell of the flower. They smell like chocolate, so that's why they're named chocolate lilies. And they are different. I know there's chocolate lilies in North America. They're quite a different flower. They are beautiful and they grow prolifically, like a little carpet of flowers blanketing the earth in spring, and they're one of my favourite flowers. So yeah, I really wanted to reflect the lily flower shape in the shawl design and created this segmentation in the shaping, and actually make a lily, a flower shawl, a shawl in the shape of a flower. That was my initial goal with this project. So the Chocolate Lily Shawl is worked with a full skein and a mini skein of fingering weight yarn, and I wanted to make the most of that, a single skein essentially project, something that could be large enough to wear and cozy up into, and you know, a pleasurable project to work on. So it's a reasonably fast project. And nearly finished. I'm pretty much up to the bind off section. I've cast on the few stitches, worked the stockingette section, increasing, added the eyelet lace at the bottom, which will open up beautifully after blocking. Have changed colours to the mini skein, have knit back and forth for 3 rows, and now I'm on the wrong side row, the 4th row with this colour, where I'm doing the setup for the looped edging. And I just want to show you that before I then show you how to work the stitches for this on the right side row. So beginning with knit 2 together, knit 2 together, yarn over twice, so 1, 2, slip, slip, knit, knit 2 together, yarn over twice, slip, slip, knit, and that's setting us up for those lovely big loops. So I'll continue and finish off this row with knit 2 together, yarn over, slip, slip, knit. So now I'm on right side row number 5 of the looped edging. I start by knitting 1 stitch and then I have the 2 yarn overs. So I'm going to work 5 stitches into those 2 yarn overs, knit, purl, knit into the first stitch, and then purl, knit into the second stitch. So knit, purl, knit, take that first yarn over off, purl, knit. And you can see I'm bringing the yarn back and forth as I work each of those knit purl stitches. Then we have 2 stitches that are knit. These are the stitches that were decreased, the knit 2 together, the slip slip knit, and I work this again. 2 yarn overs, knit, purl, knit into that first yarn over and take it off the left needle, purl, knit, take that off. So that's the 5 stitches into the 2 yarn overs, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, knit the 2 next stitches, which were the decreases, and have the double yarn over and start this again. Knit, purl, knit, take that stitch off the needle, purl, and knit for our 5 stitches. Knit 2. So I'll continue on. You can see that that forms those lovely big loops. Then row 6 will be knit back across and row 7 is binding off. The blocking process starts with a good soak. I've just soaked this for about half an hour and I'm ready to squeeze out gently any excess fluid or pour off the water and then lay it on a towel and roll up the towel to absorb any extra liquid. So here it is wrapped in the towel and still damp, but the excess moisture has been removed. So I like to start by just gently stretching a little bit across the edges, the increased edges, to maximize the stretch on that area. So then I lay the shawl out on the mats in roughly the shape that I want to start blocking it in, which in this case is kind of a curved shape at the top edge. Instead of blocking it straight across as I would for some other shawls, I'm blocking this to maintain that shaping. So I kind of pull it approximately into the shape for blocking and then start pinning it out. And I start with the center point here at the top center where we cast on and place some pins, or in this case a blocking pin, and then I'm going to stretch it quite firmly because I want to get as much length out of this wingspan as possible so that it wraps nicely around my neck. So I stretch it as I place pins all the way up. Then back to the center, the lower area here this time, I'll start working the edges. So keeping that center aligned. actually going to block to the edge of the light purple, and then I'm going to come back and pull out the loops to maximise the impact of those. So I'm going to be firm, but be careful not to overstretch it and distort the shape. So I think I'll allow this to come up a little bit and pull out a little bit. Work my way evenly up each side here to the points and then around to the top. So that's the bulk of the shawl blocked, and then I'm going to come in and pull out each of the little loops on the edging. I'll use these little T-pins to pull out each of those. If you don't have the blockers, the multi-prong blockers, you can use these T-pins to pull out the edge, or wires, blocking wires. I just love how easy these blockers are to use. So to pull out the looped edge, doesn't really matter where you start, just work your way around, pulling it out into a little point. And that just opens it up and gives it that lovely open effect. And it's all pinned out, so I'll leave that to dry overnight. It's pretty warm here, shouldn't take too long. And then I'll unpin it and take it off the mats. And now for some embroidery fun. As I've noted, this is optional. The shawl is complete without it, but you may want to try a new technique and add something a little extra to your project, in which case I've created a really simple chain stitch embroidery technique for these stamen. Just using a tapestry needle and some of the contrast colour to do this. I've already worked 3 here so that I can show you that part. And so I'm going to do fairly close to matching on this side. I say fairly close, it's a little bit freestyle. I don't think they'll be exactly the same. And I think that that's okay. Nature has variations, and to me, having a little bit organic looks lovely. So I wouldn't worry too much if they're not perfect. I found that a blocking mat helped to just sort of hold it in place. I'm not particularly skilled at embroidery, but I do know that often the fabric will be held in some sort of vise to keep it from moving. But with this knit fabric, I didn't really want to stretch it out or distort it. So I decided that just pinning it out gently will be enough to kind of hold it in place while I'm working the embroidery. So with the first one, I worked the middle one first, which just actually runs down along that row of knit stitches, a column of knit stitches. So it's quite easy to guide yourself along there. So what I did first was just kind of find my way down to near where I'd like that to end so that I'm on track. And then I've given myself a couple of little guides, just adding pins. These are just the blocking pins. You could use sewing pins, it doesn't really matter. Just something to hold it in place and keep it still, and also give me a guide so I know that I'm working down this column towards that pin, which is this center here. So I just take a length of the yarn, not a specific amount. I have found that I needed to rethread the needle for these. I didn't have quite enough, so a reasonable length, but not too long that it becomes awkward while sewing. So I have my thread, keep that tail close to the end, and start by inserting the needle through the center of the middle stitch here. That's going to be my first stitch for this column. Pull through and just sort of hold the tail end. That I'll weave in after I finish this. Then I loop it around and just hold that with my thumb and put the needle back through that first stitch that I originally went through. Then I'm going to come up through the next stitch. And pull. And we have one little chain. So I'm going to repeat this process to make a chain of chains. So loop it around and hold it with my left thumb. Bring the needle back through that original loop and then up, one stitch up, and allow that loop to wrap around the stitch just stitched. So there's 2 chain stitches there. And continue on, back through that middle loop, up through the next stitch. I'm just going 1 bar, and there we are. It does take a little bit of practice, for me anyway, because I don't really do embroidery. And yeah, I've been practicing some ideas. So I've actually been pulling out a few attempts at this. So I just say, look, if you feel it looks not quite the way you want it to, just unravel it. Give yourself plenty of time. I don't think this is a thing to be rushed. So just wait until you've got lots of light, feeling rested, and just enjoy the process. Loop around, hold it in place with my thumb, bring the needle through that last stitch and up. Gently tighten it. Don't want it to be too tight, just to keep it loose-ish. And continue working along, aiming for the pin, and until we get to the point where we'll work the bobbly bit. So I'm going to work it up approximately 42 rows. So that's approximately what I did here, because I want these 2 to pretty much match. So once I've got to that point, I'll stop and show you the next step. My chain is at the length I'd like it to be now, and I had just enough yarn to do that, so I've rethreaded the needle for the little bobbly bit, which is worked the same way as mentioned before, except the chain loops will be much longer. So I come through the bottom of that last stitch and pull, leaving a bit of a tail behind to weave in. So I'll hold on to that while I work the loop. So I'm going to make my loop 6 stitches high this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Go back through the center of that bottom stitch. 2, 4, 6. Pull through, and then this time I'll finish off by coming back through the top of the next stitch above, and then back down and through the original stitch. First loop. Gently tighten it, but be careful not to over tighten. So now I'll be working a stitch on each side 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, each getting a bit shorter. So the next one will come about 5 stitches, and then maybe 3 or 5, 4, 2. I'll work this side first, 1 stitch, and then 1 stitch on this side, and keep going across like that. So the same thing, loop, come through that original bottom stitch, come up to the 5th stitch, pull, and come back down through the top of the stitch above and give that a little tighten. 2. So now I'll do the one on this side. Hold the loop, come through the bottom of that stitch, up about 5 stitches. Bring the needle over the stitch above and back down through. So it's a total of 3 stitches now. You can see that the yarn is a bit variegated, so it adds a little bit of life to the bubbles with the texture. So coming in at the 4th stitch, bring the needle back down through the stitch above. Might have pulled a bit tight there, so I'll just loosen it off gently. There we go. And one last time for each side. And voila, got the first bubbly bit. So you can kind of fiddle with it a bit until you're happy with it. And then we'll start the next one. So I've pinned it back onto this bit of blocking mat for the next stem that I'm going to do. So I'm working to kind of replicate what I've done on this side. So I'll do a shorter stem with a little bubble here and one here. I'll start with this one. Working on the angles a little bit trickier, so work out where I want to have it end for starters, and the spacing, I want to probably have it almost in between the two, so I'm aiming for there. So having a pin there just helps me aim my stitches and know when to stop as well. I'll start in the centre of that same stitch as the first, and again hold on to the yarn. I'll have a few ends to weave in afterwards. And work the chain stitch. Come in through the bottom of the stitch and come out to the stitch in the column next to the stitch I'm working. Because I need to start angling it rather than going straight like I did for this first one. going to angle it towards my pin. And again, poke that in, go one stitch to the stitch next to, in the column next to. So you can see it's starting to go in that direction. So I'm not moving over a column every time. Sometimes I'm working into the same column. So probably 2 stitches into a column and then 1 across. Just keep checking it, see that I'm happy. Can always undo it and start again if I'm not happy. And so I'll keep working my way towards that pin. And I've reached the length I'd like it to be. And I'll work the bobble essentially the same, except I'll be going diagonally across those stitches. So working instead of the column that's part of the column of this lot of stitches, I'll be working the column over here. So still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches above. You could make yours a little bigger or smaller, it's really up to you. And complete the bobble in the same way. And I finished. I added a couple of single ones here where the segment is a bit narrower and have kept it fairly symmetrical. Really, the possibilities are endless with this. You can do whatever you'd like. Add dots, more dots around, have them all the same length. Add more in, really, it's up to you and your imagination. But here's our way of adding these little embroidery touches to the shawl. So how to wear your chocolate lily shawl now that you've finished. As you saw at the start of the video, I was wearing it like this, draped over the shoulders. And the shaping really lends itself to wearing it in this way. It's very comfortable, nice shape to wear when maybe sitting at the computer and typing, and you can bring it closed at the front if you like. Use a shawl stick or a shawl pin or enamel pin and close that in there. Let me see. Hold it like so. I do have the shawl pin, so I'm just using a stick there. Could wear it with the shawl pin. And then there's a nice feature there at the front as well as the back. So this is probably how I'll wear this particular shawl mostly. I do tend to really enjoy wearing my shawls point at the front, bandana style, and you can do that with this shawl too. So just wrap the ends around and let them dangle, and have that at the front to keep the chest nice and warm. It's good to wear under a coat this way. And another way to wear this is quite similarly, but caught on the spiky plant there. Kind of scrunch it up a bit, so think of it more like a scarf, and then it can sit more closely around the neck and act more like a cow sitting around the neck like so. Still with a little peak. We can scrunch it up more if you like, even flip that over and make it more like a little scarf or neck warmer. So yeah, there's a few ways you can wear your chocolate lily shawl and get a bit of coziness from that single skein.